Good evening to the members of Pandit Ravi Shankar Music Foundation. A very, very happy Independence Day to the viewers and abroad also. For the 73rd Independence Day, you can understand how we got this independent and so feel free now from the clutches of the British period. So today, friends, we are entering our 33rd episode starting from 16th May, talking about Pandit Ravi Shankarji reflections named celebrating his 100 years because we can't do any live shows. So this was the much beautiful platform to talk about Panditji, to know about Panditji. And of course, without the umbrella shade of Srimati Shukanya Shankar Maima, it was unable for me to do such a big program, such a big arrangement. And of course, Gaurav has also joined. So today, friends, I would like to introduce our guest, Sri Shankarlal Bhattacharya. Mama, namaskar.
Namaskar, namaskar,
How are you,
namaskar.
Mama? And let my viewers know that Sri Shankarlal Bhattacharya is associated with Pandit Ravi Shankar ji from last 1960s. Started his career as a journalist in Anandabazar Patrika, and then he was associated till last with Pandit ji. So today he will let you know about the memories with Pandit ji, and to him will talk to Shankarlal Mama is Gaurav Mazumdar Dada. So Gaurav Dada, welcome
Thank you.
Gaurav Dada.
Thank you, Nabarun. Happy Independence Day. Dada Amar
Thank you.
pranam apnake. My pranams to you. Happy Independence Day, and what a pleasure to
Thank
see
you.
you. And I hope you're doing well.
Incidentally, 15th August 1947 is my birthday.
Yeah.
I was born on the very day of independence. On the
Very
very
good.
day.
Happy birthday. So you are 73, Mama, now.
Yes,
Now you
yes,
want to say?
yes.
Okay, happy birthday, Mama, to you also. So nice. It's
On the
such a
very day.
coincidence. It's
Yes.
such a coincidence that you are also 73. Yeah.
Incidentally, it is
Yeah.
the birthday of two other great musicians. One is Ustad Amir Khan Saab.
Yeah.
He was born on the 15th of August. And also a very great Bengali vocalist, very great, Pandit Prasun Bandyopadhyay.
Oh.
And of course, it is the birthday of Sri Aurobindo, Rishi Aurobindo. And
Rishi
it is
Aurobindo.
also the day of passing away of Sri Ramakrishna Deva, Paramahansa Ramakrishna Deva. He passed
Today he
out
left. Today he left.
in
Mama.
1986. In 1986, he left this world. 1886.
Oh, yeah. 1886, right.
1886, 15th of August. So it's a it's very crowded with a lot of great events.
Yeah, it's a very historic day.
I would like to remind you all, Pandit Ji, Ravuda, I used to call him Ravuda. Ravuda composed the music that you were playing right now, Sare Jahan Se Acha, on a 15th August. It was actually played. It was played on the radio after composition. After his composition, it was played on the radio of 1947, 15th August.
Yeah.
He was a staffer of the radio station then, Delhi, and in fact he composed two great pieces on very special days. One is this putting to melody this beautiful poem of Iqbal Sahab, Muhammad Iqbal, which is Sare Jahan Se Acha, Hindustan Hamara. And also he composed a rag, Mohan Ghosh, on the day of Mahatma Gandhi's demise. That is when he reported to AIR Delhi and heard that he has been assassinated, the director of the station said, Panditji, you have to do some work for special work for today. What do you want to do? He said, okay, let me a little time. So he went into his studio, sat there for a while, and he used Mohan Kos, you know how. He took the name of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Mohan. So he took, uh, 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 he was explaining it to me so beautifully. He said, you know how I composed Mohan Kos? I took Mohan, Madhyam from Mohan, and he put it into a Koshi frame, that is Koshi Kannada frame. He put Madhyam and Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. So he used three particular words, Ga, Ni, Dha. Ga, Ni, Dha from Gandhi. Ga, Ni, Dha. So he used the notes Gandhar, then Nikhad, and then Dhaivat, and used it with the Kosh Ang and composed the Rag Mohan Kosh and played the very day of Gandhi's demise, that is 31st of January 1946.
Okay,
So
Mama,
he,
now,
Bolo.
Mama,
Bolo.
sorry to interrupt. Now, over to Gaurav, who will talk to you about your journey with Pandit Ravi Shankar ji and the memories
Yeah.
you have with you to deliver to
Yes.
the audience and the viewers of Pandit Ravi Shankar Music Foundation. They want to know the
I
memories, and over
consider,
to Gaurav to ask.
you know, am I to
Gaurav,
speak? Am I to speak? Oh, okay.
Yeah, Kaka, Amar Pranam Apnake. What a pleasure having you on the show. And I'm really looking forward to hearing and knowing a lot more about our Guru, Bharat Ratna Pandit Ravi Shankar ji. Please continue talking. I'm listening with full attention. I'm really enjoying. Thank you.
The great thing about Panditji Rubuda is that when he would talk to you for a long while, you could actually learn a lot of things about music, about life, about some modes and manners of, say, life in England or France, where he actually grew up at one point of time. He went to school in Paris. So I used to use myself, my heart, I would say, my memory, I would say, like a tape recorder. Whenever he spoke, otherwise, when I'm writing, when he's speaking for the book, of course, I would tape him. I never wrote one word outside of the thing that came out in the tape. But otherwise, even when I was traveling with him, he would always say certain things deliberately with a very cautious rhythm and rhyme of a teacher, knowing full well this boy with me is going to learn a few things when I speak to him. And he was also a very astute listener. If you spoke to him something very sensible, something very important, he would listen to you with, almost a boy's look, and record every little thing. And you might know that sometime or the other he will come back with the same information to you and tell him, "Tumi amaki bolechile, you said this thing to me on that particular day. I remember it." Now, a beautiful thing about Rubuda, I must tell, because it is his 100th birth anniversary. After when I first met him, he was gloriously famous. Everyone knew him. He was an overly famous person. But what I found is he did not have any hang-up of a famous person. No hang-ups at all. Because, when I first interviewed him, that is long time ago, 1969. And that was for a journal called, that's now defunct, Hindustan Standard, for their Sunday magazine. I remember he told me, last time when you came to me, you had posed a question which I said I will answer when I come to see you again. And that is what I'm going to answer to. Can you remember? I mean, just imagine I was only a young boy from somewhere. I mean, and he was the Pandit Ravi Shankar. He remembered a certain question I had asked him. You know what that question was? I think it's high time we talked about these. It was a question about Annapurna Shankar. And I didn't know that, I mean, of course, they were separated. They were not living together. That I knew, of course. But I didn't know what kind of relationship they still had. But I said, Robuda, I was calling, no, I used to call it Raviji, not Robuda. Robuda came much later. And I said, Raviji, how was your relationship like with Annapurna ji? That was the last question I remember. And he said, okay, I'll come back to it sometime. I didn't know what that sometime will be because I'm not supposed to interview him every now and then. So anyway, when I got to him for the second time, that was at Lala Sridhar's place on Baliganj place, Baliganj Park Road, Baliganj Park Road. When I went to him, and with me was Shubroto Rai Chaudhary, the sitarist. He wanted to meet Ravi Shankar ji also. So we were there, and I say before I could start my interview, he said, Shankar, you had asked a question last time. I said, what was that? He said, you asked me about Annapurna. I said, yes. He said, you wanted to know how the relationship was between me and her. Is it true? I said, yes. You know what he said? Wonderful, wonderful. It actually sounds like a story. He said, you are only interviewing me for a newspaper. This is too important a piece to go into a newspaper interview. Later on, if we at all get to do a long piece where a lot of things will be discussed threadbare, maybe I can return to it. Is it okay for you? I said, of course, it's okay. And I didn't want to know that answer for this particular interview because it was only a newspaper interview. And now, when I was writing Ragunurag with him in London, that was 8 years later. This is 69 and this was 1977. I used to ask him once in a while, Rubuda, can we get to talk about Annapurnadi? He said, okay, later on. And then in one of those days, he also said, you don't seem to forget what you had in mind that long time ago. I said, no, if I came all this way to London for a book, and you told me that it would go into a book, it can go into a book, we might as well discuss it. He said, okay, don't worry, we'll get to it. And then after lunch at his hotel, that is Chelsea Cloisters, he went out for a little walk with me. We were walking down Chelsea. Then suddenly in the middle of the walk, he said, Shankar, you always ask me about Annapurna. Can't you forget all this? I said, I came all the way for a complete book. And how can I make it complete without any reference to Annapurna ji? And he said, yes, I know. I'm going to answer all that. Now let's return. He took a U-turn from there, walked swiftly with me, went up to the hotel room and asked for tea. When the tea was laid out into that tray, he said, now get on with your questions. One thing I always say when I talk about Rududa is that he never evaded questions. He never evaded questions, even if it was very painful for him to answer. In fact, in the foreword to Ragunurag, he said, there are many things he had asked me which were painful when I first heard, but I still answered to those questions because I knew those were necessary. Even many unpleasant questions and very unpleasant answers to them. You know why? Because he talked about many musicians. They might not like his observations or whatever. He talked about gloriously about great people he loved and learned from. Ustad Aladdin Khan Sahab, Ali Akbar Khan Sahab, Amir Khan Sahab, he loved immensely. He used to tell me, when I first asked him about Amir Khan Sahab, he said, Amir Khan Sahab. You know him? I said, yes, I interviewed him. Oh, really? He is a great, great musician. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Your voice is gone, Dada. Your voice is gone. We can't hear you.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Dada, we can hear you now. Thank you. Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you now. We can hear you.
আপনাকে শুনতে পাচ্ছি আমরা, আপনি বলুন মামা, শুনতে পাচ্ছি এবার বলুন।
উনি আমাদের শুনতে পাচ্ছেন না।
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
আমি বলছিলাম হঠাৎ থেকে
We can hear you. We can hear you.
We can hear you.
But উনি আমাদের শুনতে পাচ্ছেন না। উনি আমাদের শুনতে পাচ্ছেন না।
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Gaurav, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes. We can hear you. We can hear you.
তুমি শুনতে পাচ্ছ আমাকে?
হ্যাঁ, শুনতে পাচ্ছি, শুনতে পাচ্ছি।
না, আমি বুঝতে পারছি না ওরা শুনতে চাইছে কি। আমি বলবো, তুমি
বলুন। হ্যাঁ, হ্যাঁ, exactly. We can hear you. We can hear you. আমরা শুনতে পাচ্ছি আপনাকে।
কনভারসেশন কি করে হবে বল? হ্যালো,
we can hear you. We can hear you.
হ্যালো, হ্যালো,
Dada, we are able to hear you clearly.
আরে মাইমা শোনা যাচ্ছে মামা?
না, ওনার আসলে সাউন্ডটা কি হচ্ছে, আমরা শুনতে পাচ্ছি, উনি আমাদের শুনতে পাচ্ছেন না। উনি আমাদের শুনতে পাচ্ছেন না, বাট উই আর এবল টু হিয়ার ইউ।
ওনাকে মাইমা বলে বলবার জন্য, ওনাকে বলুন 10 মিনিট উনি বলুন। আমার হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ শুনতে পাচ্ছি আমরা, বলুন আপনি। ওকে,
শুনতে পাচ্ছি। আচ্ছা আচ্ছা আচ্ছা, বলছি। আর একটা জিনিস খুব বাংলায় বলবো? বাংলায় বলবো?
English bolun, English.
Another thing which touched me also was when we went to Banaras. He took me with him to the Bangali Tola house where he was born. He looked up at that particular house, almost dilapidated, would break down any moment. A very sort of, a very run down kind of a space. He showed me that is where it all started, He said, that is where it all started. And then suddenly a gentleman, he being there, and Alok Mitra, my photographer, was taking photographs. Suddenly there was a huge crowd forming. All people around from Banaras or Bangali Tola who wanted to meet Ravi Shankar, they could recognize him instantly. So they came over, and from them, a gentleman emerged, a Bengali gentleman. They were the prosperous family right in front of the house of Pandit Ravi Shankar, right in front of the house. And he said, Rubu, তুমি কেমন আছো? তুমি এত বড় হয়ে গেছো, এখন তো তোমার কথা সবসময় পাই। Rubu, you've become so big, so great. We always learn about you from everywhere. How are you? And they embraced, And then Rubuda started telling me, this is my childhood friend. They are the rich people living in that house, They had a Packard car. They used to travel in a Packard car in those days. And we used to see them from the veranda. And I would always wish that I could lead a life like that. So, Rubuda is a man, he was as normal and as pleasant as, whenever I asked him about his pain, he would immediately say, well, it passes, Fame is not something to talk about. Ask something else. This is also, I recorded in one of my pieces on him. He said, fame is nothing to discuss, there was a gentleman when we were discussing this. He said, you are so famous. Was your Dada Uday Shankar so famous in his own time? Then he said, of course he was. Ask Shankar. He knows a little bit of that. Uday Shankar was immensely famous. People would look at him as if he were a god. And, now that people know little of him, less of him, is because those times have passed, Maybe there will be a time, we will be also passé, and the people will only know us about us through our work, through some books, maybe the book that we are now writing and things like that. But fame is something which passes. And that evening, when I was returning with him after lunch at that particular place we were in, he said, why I don't want to talk about fame is because, you always calculate fame by, measuring a person with another person. Would you consider Mahatma Gandhi famous? No, he is Gandhi. Would you consider Rabindranath Tagore famous? No, we don't talk about him being famous. He is Rabindranath Tagore, what he means to us. Similarly, Uday Shankar, what he means to us is important, not the fame that he carried when he was at the peak of his career. So, that is the way we should address the issue. There was another time, I quite remember, when Uday Shankar passed away in Kolkata. We were working on the book in London. Then I was phoned from Calcutta by our editor, Mr. Shorkat, that he has passed away. Immediately send a copy. So what did we do? I told him, Rubuda, will you dictate the thing to me? He goes, no, I have to collect everything. gather everything. I'm shocked. I had to gather everything in my head. And you come after 2 hours. So I went. What to do with 2 hours? So I went to a part of London where I had a friend. Spent a little time with him, had coffee and tea and all that, and then came back after 2 hours. And believe you me, he had written the piece on Uday Shankar, which was simply titled Dada in Bangla, in Bengali. It was all written by him with his own hand. I said, my God. He said, now, please look at it, see how good it is. Will it go for your newspaper? That was Anand Bazar Patrika. I had a look at it and I was amazed. I said, what do I do with this? It's beautiful. I don't have to. I'm going to get it passed, because in those days you couldn't send message. You can't send a copy unless you went to the sort of particular office where there was a sort of that what you call teleprinter system. You have to compose it and it will go by it. So I went with Ashok Gupta, the officer who worked at Anand Bazar Patrika's London office. So I went with him. You know how we worked at it. I was reading from the copy and Ashok Da was composing it in Roman types, because Bengali types were not possible. So he was like Ami Ravi Shankar. It would be AMIRAVISHANKAR. So I was reading out the whole piece, in Roman letters. I said AMIRAVISHANKAR, Amar, 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 Dada, DADA, Uday Shankar, UDAYSHANKR. That is the way I was reading the whole piece, and he was composing. And it was sent at 2:00 in the night, India night, Calcutta night, and it came out the very next day, Dada. And believe you me, there was a huge commotion all over the country. Whoever read it in Bangla, because they couldn't believe that Uday Shankarji died in the afternoon. There were no system like us. I mean, it wasn't a cybernetic world, it wasn't an IT world or whatever. It was a teleprinter world. Teleprinters took a lot of time to compose a thing and send it over. It had to go through jams. It had to go through a lot of traffic. And before it reached, it was half the day was over. And then somebody had to retrieve it and edit it and things like that. But this is the way we sent the whole piece in Roman Bangla. And it came out the very next day. And when I took that newspaper after a couple of days, because the newspaper had to come by plane. So the next day or the day after, when the newspaper arrived, I took a copy for Pandit Ravi and went to his hotel. He looked at the picture, was amazed. Almost 1 million people thronging the roads of Kolkata. That funeral sort of procession, taking the body of Uday Shankar. He said, my goodness, how beautifully Kolkata can remember their great people. How beautiful send-offs they do to their great people. And then, I still remember this. You must note this. I've written this, but every time I mention this, I have a tear in my eye. I could still see his beautiful wide-eyed pair of eyes, almost glistening with a few drops. He said, I wish I could die in Kolkata. That didn't happen, of course. Life is different, But sir, Kolkata mara gele bhalo hoy na go. Kolkata lokra eto bhalobashe, Kolkata mara gele bhalo hoy. I said, I don't want to talk about death. You have to live a long, long time, and we can come back to that question later on. Said, yes. He lived a long life. That's very good. What I mean to say is, Robuda's life was an uninterrupted festival. It was a celebration, I call it, that we have that beautiful Sanskrit word also used in Hindi and Bangla, Utsav. His life, his Jivan was an utsav. It was a celebration from the very day he was born in 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 Banaras. He spent a very lovely boyhood in Banaras. A sad, I would say, because his father was not there. He was in England. He used to send out some money every month, 200 rupees. He didn't send. It was a pension that he got from Charwar, where he worked as a Dewan. They used to send the pension over to uh, Mrs. Shankar, Mrs. Chaudhary, that is his mother, Himangana. And those 200 rupees, by the time it arrived at Banaras, shrank into 60, because whichever hand it passed, he sort of, put aside a few pennies for himself. So that is the way the family was working. Meanwhile, Dada Uday Shankar also went over to England to study art. So they were actually three brothers and the mother. And that was a very trying time. He was fondly in love with his mother. Whenever he spoke about his mother, I could see his eyes, telling a lot of stories. And I still remember, even he had a great feeling for his father, whom he saw a few times in his whole life. Because he first saw his father, Sham Shankar Chaudhary, when he was 8 years old. He came from England. By the time he brought two European ladies with him. One was his English wife had died, so he had brought Madame Annie. Madame Annie was his girlfriend of the time, and another and his sister-in-law. That is the sister of his departed wife, English wife. They were there. They had put up at that famous hotel called Hotel de Paris, Hotel de Paris in Varanasi. And this young kid, 8-year-old boy, was going to see his father for the first time. He was so impressed. How beautiful looking gentleman, European dress, perfume all over his body, reeking of perfume, cologne. And then he sat with them for dinner. And he was explaining, hold this knife with this, hold the spoon with this, eat it like this and that. Beautiful food, but he hardly could eat because he didn't know how to operate with, how to handle a knife and spoon. And then in London, when we were working on this book, one day we were passing in a car, and the gentleman who was driving the car was Nishit Ganguly, his manager, a manager in England for a while. So Nishida was very closely attached to Hemant Mukhopadhyay, the famous singer Hemant Kumar. So while we were passing a bridge, Battersea Bridge it's called, he said, Prabhuda, Nishida said, this is the bridge on which I took a beautiful picture of Hemant Mukherjee. And then, like a young boy, like a kid, what he says. He says, Ravi Shankar says, so Shankar, we must have a picture here where Hemant was also photographed. We must have a picture here. We all started laughing so much. We got up the car and we stood on that bridge, and he was taking those pictures. We were standing together, and while he was taking pictures, wow, Panditji was talking about his father. He said, as I look into that Thames waters, I'm reminded of those days. Now, since we are talking about our family, my parentage, my boyhood, this river reminds me of the Ganga at Varanasi. Whenever I found myself, a little time, I could sort of play with myself, be lonely, that is. I would go to that riverside, sit on the bank, and watch the water pass. And then he looked at the water and said, you know what? London has a beautiful character. I have seen London when I was very young, when I came here with my brother. I was only 9 years old. I still remember London looked the way it looks now. They don't change. I mean, that is a character of a good city, great city. You look the same. And you know, when I stand here on this bridge, I'm reminded of that Kasi bank where I would sit and watch the waters. It looks like it's flowing from there and coming out down here. So that is Robudar. You know, he could connect the Eastern world and the Western world. He would connect Western music, classical music, with Indian classical music. He would connect Indian classical music with a latter day Indian music, Bengali music, Hindi music, whatever. And his connectivity sort of was so immense that when he would talk about, say, for instance, Yehudi Menuhin, he would say, I still remember that beautiful story. I mean, it became a story because I wrote it as per his desire. You know, he said, you were talking about Menuhin the other day, weren't you? I said, yes. You want to interview him? No? I said, yes. He said, let him come back. He's not in London now. When he comes back, I'll talk to him and make a time for you. You should go and interview. He is a man real worth an interview. But do you know, why do you like Menuhin? I said, why? Then he said, what are the famous pieces played by him that attracts you most? I said, Bartok. Oh my God, how fascinating. He said, Bartok. You heard his Bartok? He said, I have it with me. I play it whenever I get it time. He said, Bartok, he is a great delineator of Bartok music. Bela Bartok. You know, I mean, I'm so happy you know this. And when you go and interview him, please talk about Bartok. So this is Rup. And then I still remember one thing. I've already written about it, but I still want to tell you. That is, the whole day I would be with him, and we would converse, and all would be taped. In the night time, when I came to the place where I stayed at during that time, Bound Street, I would stay up long in the night and transcribe what has been recorded in the daytime, line after line. I had to play, rewind, fast forward, rewind, play back, rewind. You know why? Because I wanted to hear every little word he spoke and put them there the way it had to be there, with all the commas and full stops which I had to sort of introduce. But the words were his. And also, you know, he spoke so beautifully. You could also listen to the commas and the full stops. So the night time, when I would write it, that was like being in a university. Like I was listening to a philosopher speaking and writing down his speech. The whole, I mean, I would stay up as late as 1:32 every night. And I still remember how beautiful the time was from 9 onwards, after dinner when I sat down to write. And I still remember it was like being in a university. I've always said, whenever I came to speak about Rabudar's conversations, which are recorded and wrote, it's like, you know, being in a university, being taught by a professor. And one thing, he was like he was like an Oxford scholar. He had the highest level of thinking, but the most simple way of placing it to the student. His language wasn't crowded with big sounding words and all that. He was a very plain talking, plain speaking person. But the quality of the content was wonderful, wonderful. I mean, even today when I read this book, this Raganurag, Ragunurag, I learn from that every moment. I know it by heart because I don't know how many times I read it in my life, apart from listening from the great man himself and writing it over days. I still go back to the book whenever I have a doubt on something. What did he say on this? What has he said on that? What is his opinion on this? I go back and I'm still being, tutored by Panditji. It's wonderful. I can't release myself from the beautiful emotional grip that Ravi Shankar had on me. He's one of the most magical sort of personalities I have found in my life. Very magical. And one more thing. It's high time we spoke about it. I was very sad because we couldn't celebrate his birth centenary. Then later on, I reminded myself, why should we be so downcast? This man spent his life like a festival. Throughout. When he made 75, I remember, I went to Delhi to interview him for Doordarshan Kolkata. It was an interview for Doordarshan Kolkata. That is Calcutta TV. They had sent a team with me to sort of record it. It's usually played on the system every year during his birth or death anniversary. And I remember before I could ask him anything, he said, "Acha, তুমি আমাকে কবে থেকে চেনো? Since when do you know me?" So I said, from there and there. I've written it. He said, "Yes, I know. You wrote a book on that when you first met me." Okay. Now tell me, how do you remember the first time you heard me on the stage? When was that? I said, I heard you on stage 1970. I heard you I heard you the 5th time on sometime 1970. The first time I heard him was 1964. And I remember when I heard that particular piece he played on his birth anniversary. It was at Ravindra Shodon, and there was a particular group called Suresh Songit Songshad. It's a very important. I don't know if it still operates or not. But it was a very, very powerful organization, and they celebrated his birthday. He said, "You remember?" I said, "Of course I remember." And I also remember you wound up your program with Pancham Sigara. You remember that? I said, "Yes." So then he said, now I'm 75. I was 50 then. So 25 years have passed, I said, "Yes." How old do I get in these 25 years? And I said, no, you don't look having gotten old. You look having gotten much too famous for me to handle. And he laughed a bit and said, "No, get on with your questions." And what he did when I said when he said get on with your questions, and I was just playing with the questions I had in my mind, to which I would start with. He said, "Why not start from Banaras?" I said, "Why?" He said, "Whenever a new birthday comes, I'm very sad because I remember the people I have lost in the process." Then I said, "Who are you remembering?" He said, "My Chodda, a youngest elder, the brother right before me, Bhupendra Shankar, Chodda. And then he started, you know, reading out his association with Bhupendra. He said he was very tall. He was the tallest of the lot of all five of us. And then he was very talented. He was very poetic. He used to write poetry, and he had a sort of a female side to his character. If someone scolded him or, you know, or used a harsh word, you know, he would break into tears. And he was very close to me. Whenever he felt sad, he would come and grip me and say, Robo, Robo, Robo. He would, you know, discuss his pain with me. So when he grew up into a young man of 18, he was given the family bus. He became in charge of the bus, which would fly around Banaras, go out of Banaras, and that was the way uh, a lot of revenue was pouring into the family. He said, and then one day, you know, it was the time of plague in Banaras, and the bus came with my brother lying dead, you know, in one of the seats. That was that was one of the saddest day in my life, Shankar. I couldn't get over it. Dada chole gale with no absolutely no indication. He wasn't feeling sick. He wasn't feeling. He wasn't suffering from plague or whatever. He just went. He just went to do his job. You know, took the bus, went out. Maybe he had been infected. We never knew about it. No one knew about it. Even he didn't know. He went out to work. He came back dead. It's all there. You know, it's played every time, you know, they show. And while he was saying this, you know, all this came, these are memories. I wrote it in a book called Sleepy. It's here. Sleepy. It means memory.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
And will you believe the whole interview of his 75th anniversary became an interview of memories, all memories coming back from, you know, childhood, boyhood, his learning the sitar, his being with Baba Alauddin Khan Sahib, his being with his Sir Ali Ahmad Khan Sahib, his being with Annapurna Shankar, his going abroad, making friends with the great musicians of the time, then the way he was traveling around the world. So all this actually works into a kind of a festival, you know. He was celebrating a life, you know. I mean, a marvelous, marvelous life. If you know, this is I I wrote the text of this, and Menhun's Yehudi Menhun wrote the foreword. This was Alok Mitra's book on Pandit Ravi Shankar. It's a book of pictures, you know, of his life. So this book, you know,
Yeah.
this book is a kind of an, you know, festival sort of, because all the pictures when you take from his young days to where it ends actually sometime 1995 or maybe little later, 1998. You see a whole panorama of activity, of a grand sort of biography in pictures. So that's the way he was. He led a kind of a life. You can hardly sort of make justice to in a biography. There's so many angles to it, so many sides to it. It's almost impossible. Even Ragunura, it is partly memoir and partly a discourse on music. The beauty of the book is he talks about music, he talks about other people's music, he talks about his own music, how he developed into Ravi Shankar, how he built his sitar, how he built the style of his sitar, how he sort of added parts to the sitar to make it look, to be what it was later on. And then, it's a discussion of other people's music. He talks about Bade Ghulam Ali Khan Sahab. He talks about Amir Khan Sahab. He talks about Bhimshen Joshi. He talks about Ali Akbar Khan Sahab's music. He talks about Aladdin Khan Sahab's way of teaching in the grand sort of combination of ideas that man was, of musical ideas. He played so many instruments, and he learned from so many places, from so many great ustads. He sort of he made himself a kind of a walking universe, and so many other. I can't rattle out all the names. I mean, it's full of people. He also talked about. He talked in his later work, that is Sriti. He talked about his music work in films. He talked about Shofili Ray. He talked about his working with American filmmakers. He talked about his association with Richard Attenborough when he worked on Gandhi. So, I mean, he talked about mainly about when he talked about dances, and he would mainly talk about the lessons that he got from Uday Shankar. He considered Uday Shankar a magnificent, absolutely magnificent teacher. He believed that Uday Shankar was not properly understood, even today, because we're still, people are discovering great paths, beautiful paths, ideas, theories, theses from, and it was all self-made.
Yeah, we are listening to you. We are listening to you. শুনতে পাচ্ছি, শুনতে পাচ্ছি।
Hello.
We are listening. We are listening. Yeah, we are listening to every single word. And না হয়নি, হয়নি।
এই হয়ে গেছে মনে হয়। আমায় শুনতে পাচ্ছো?
আমরা শুনছি। হ্যাঁ, শুনতে পাচ্ছি, শুনতে পাচ্ছি। We are listening. We are listening. We are listening. We are listening.
আমায় শুনতে পাচ্ছো?
হ্যাঁ, শুনতে পাচ্ছি, শুনতে পাচ্ছি।
Can you hear?
Yes, 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 yes.
আমি শেষ করব? হয়ে গেছে তো?
না, না, আপনি বলুন যেটা বলছিলেন সেটা বলুন আপনি। হ্যাঁ, আপনি বলুন যেটা বলছিলেন সেটা প্লিজ সে। What you were speaking, please. আমরা শুনছি এখানে, আমরা। We are listening. We are listening.
বলছে? Okay. I think I have to wind up because there are other speakers also.
Okay, okay.
At one time, I almost served as a, go between Pandit Ravi Shankar and Satyajit Ray. The result of that is this book, Ray on Ravi, Satyajit Ray, Ravi Shankar. Satyajit Ray, he wanted to make a film on Ravi Shankar. That was in 1958 something. He made 120 sketches of Panditji in different, sort of moods, positions, beautiful frames those were. He wanted to make a documentary on Ravi Shankar. But after Upu Shankar, their sort of relationships, cooled off because, as it happens, a great director, he has his ideas about, and he being Shobhit Rai, he knows what music is, and he loved Ravi Shankar, great deal. But he thought, Ravi Shankar thought that he was editing his pieces which he composed for the film. So that was a kind of a misunderstanding, so they went apart. And after working with him, after working with Ali Akbar Khan Sahab, after working with Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahab, Shobhit Babu realized that since he knew a lot of music himself, that these are great musicians, but to work with them for his film project is getting difficult because he cannot clip them. They feel bad. He had to clip them, but they would feel bad that he was censoring, sort of. But before before Upu Shankar was, finished, he had already made up his mind that he would make a documentary on Ravi Shankar because of his beautiful face, his mood, his ideas, and the way he would play, and that famous theme music of Pt.Ravi. Da 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 da. This piece is a very folkish piece, but it came to Ravi Shankar while he was watching the rough cut of Pt.Ravi at a film hall called Bhavani. It's a place very close to very close to my place here. I'm in my residence now at Tollygunj. And just 1 second. The whole piece was composed in one session, nighttime session, 8-hour session in the studios. And of course, the world knows how great that piece was. And Ravi and Satyajit had made it the theme music of all the films in the trilogy. It passes through Pt.Ravi, it goes to Aparajito, it ends up with Upu Shankar. So, he was very fond of Ravi Shankar in his own way. So he wanted to make it that film. So after they broke off, that particular script, those visual script, that stayed with. So when I was working with Ravi Shankar in London, he said, you go to Satyajit Babu once in a while, you go and talk to him and all that. So you can go and ask him if he still has it. He had made a whole sort of script, picture script, storybook with visuals. He actually sketched them. I had seen some of those. He told me. So when I came to Kolkata, back to Kolkata, and after a while, when I went to see Shotit Rai on a different sort of case, I mean issue. We were talking about Ravi Shankar. He said, "How is he, Ravi Shankar?" I said, "Yes, he's fine." Then he said, he was telling me about a script you had prepared on him. He said, yes, I'll have to look for it. Yeah, it must be there. Must be somewhere there. Then Alok Mitra was working on this book that I just showed to you, the picture book. So he wanted Shotit Rai to do the cover. He said, okay, you bring all those pictures. So Alok took all the pictures to Shotit Rai. He looked at the pictures. He was appreciating, yeah, very good, very good, very good. And then he suggested that make the cover with this. And while he was discussing the cover, he said, having seen some of the pictures, very late pictures, he said, "Itu buro hoye geche." You know, Alok didn't understand it. He came back and told me, he said, "Itu buro hoye geche." Why? He said, I said, I know why. Because he still had a mind of making that film. But, the face of 1957 will not match with 1977. 20 years had passed. So the face doesn't look the same. So it will be a little problem because script that he wrote, beautiful script. And as luck would have it, I was asked by Shondit Rai, son of Chatterji Rai, when they were making this book, that I should write the text for the book because I knew both Chatterji Rai and Ravi Shankar. So I wrote that. It's a long piece, that makes the basic text of the book, apart from the pictures. So that was another experience, two great men related by mutual appreciation. I was actually working for both of them. When I would go to Shotit Rai, he would say, "How is Ravi Shankar?" And then when Rubuda would come to Calcutta, he would ask me, "Shotit Rai দেখা হয়েছে, কেমন আছেন, কি করছেন?" So that is the way it all went. And now I think, the centenary has also bound them into one piece. 1920 is Rubuda's birth year, and 1921 is Shotit Babu's birth year. So they are actually, just a year and a half different in time of birth. But this year, Ravi Shankar's birth anniversary completes, and Shotit Rai's takes off. But as I said, it's all plagued by this coronavirus. Both the centenaries are being harmed by. The celebration is being choked by this. But they're so great, so wonderful, majestic. These centenaries will not be harmed. Even Hemanta Mukherjee, who was also born in 1920, is another landmark personality. I knew him very closely, very closely. I have a book with him, and I wrote a book on him. So that is the way I know Hemanta Babu also. And there are three great festivals in Bengali life. All three of them: Ravi Shankar, Shotit Rai, Hemanta Mukherjee. So whether we can really celebrate their birth centenary is not very important. We live with them, we enjoy them, we participate in their work by learning from it, listening or seeing them and learning from them, making use of them in our own lives. This is what I call lives full of festivity. Three great lives full of festivity. And Rubuda, of course, we are talking about Rubuda. We shall always remember him. He's much too great to be honored only on a birthday or on a day of demise. They are much too great. They belong to us every day of the year, 365 days a year. We celebrate them every moment. We listen to their music, see their films, or talk about them, or read about them. And I tell myself, I'm blessed. I'm blessed by fortune that I knew these three people from very close, and I loved them. And I thank Pandit Ravi Shankar Music Foundation for letting me use this platform to express some of my great feelings for this great man, Ravi Shankar. He will live with Indians for another few hundred years. You can't get away from that. Ravi Shankar, he is a, in a sense, he's not merely a cult. He is culture, a whole body of culture, to which we will have to address, to which we'll have to return year after year after year. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shankarlal Bhattacharya Mama, to being with us, sharing the memories of none other than great Bharat Ratna Pandit Ravi Shankarji. Thank you. And thank you, Gaurav Da, also to joining us in the show. And to the viewers of Pandit.
It's a wonderful conversation. My heart has really, he touched me with his beautiful memories and words. I really thank him for bringing such beautiful light to Guruji's life. Thank you. I do my pranams to you, and what a pleasure it has been to listen to Shankarlal Bhattacharya. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Mama. Pranam. And to the viewers of Pandit Ravi Shankar Music Foundation, we are just going to connect after 10 minutes with none other than Bhajan Samrat Anup Jalota to do wait for us after 10 minutes. Okay. Mama Pranam.